Hello and welcome to the session topics in AutoCAD called Layouts, Annotation, Scales, and Inquiry Commands. You can see the menu of items that we're going to cover and their page numbers associated to the right in orange. So please take a moment and take those topics down. Don't forget, you can always pause the recording to do so. Alright, so we're going to begin by talking about layouts, and this is not a subject that is new to us. We've been working with layouts almost since the beginning. We're going to take them a step further. Okay, so the first thing I'd like to do is to take a step back and let's see what we already knew. So for example, we have our layout tabs down at the bottom of the screen. Typically at the start of a drawing you're in model space. You have layout 1 and layout 2. By clicking them it shows you pretty much a print preview, and you would use this space to organize your drawing, to scale your drawing, to add potential notes, and of course at this point in the course we have our title block drawing. So that's already there, the border and the information. We just have to update it as per drawing. Alright, so more specifically let's discuss the viewports. So when you are in layout space and you haven't activated a layout, you are in what's called paper space, as indicated by the 30, 60, 90 triangle, the word paper down here, and the fact that we don't see that familiar what's called UCS icon over here, and of course layout there. Now if we double click inside to activate the viewport, we're now in model space, or we have activated a model space viewport, in which case we no longer see paper down there. We have model. We no longer have the 30, 60, 90 over here, and we're back to our UCS icon right there, even though it still says layout there. So you have to, keep an eye on your visual cues to know what space you're in. Alright, so I'm going to double click back outside my viewport to deactivate it, and I'm going to go back to model space. Now I want you to draw let's say a 3-inch by 3-inch square. So I'm selecting rectangle, and I'm just picking anywhere, and I'm saying at 3, 3, enter. I'm going to go back to the layout tab, and I may or may not see it. Okay, because I already activated this, it does not automatically zoom to the extents of whatever I've drawn in model space. Because I've already activated it, it just stays staring at whatever it was before. So I need to double click to activate, and then say Z for zoom, Z enter, E enter, and it'll go out and find it and zoom to the extents. Now I'm going to double click outside the viewport, and we know that we can resize our viewport by selecting the edge, the frame of it, and moving our grips around. Okay, we can make a larger or a smaller one. So far we've not had a need to create an additional viewport. So let's try that. So I'm going to double click outside this viewport to deactivate it, and I'm going to go to the copy command, and I'm going to select just the frame of the viewport and press enter, and I'm going to just, let's say, snap to the corner as my base point and bring the copy over here and click again and then enter. So at this point you might think we have two squares, that we literally copied it, but we don't. Think of a viewport as a camera that's shining on an object. We simply have two cameras shining on the same square. Evidence of this would be to double click to activate one of the viewports, resting your mouse on the square and clicking, and you'll see that the other square is selected. If I hit delete, they both go away. I'm going to undo. I don't actually want to do that. Okay, so I'm going to double click outside of this one to deactivate it. Now I do not believe at this point in the course we've ever had a scenario where there were no viewports. So let's produce that. So I'm going to select on the frame of each one and hit delete. And that's an unsettling feeling, especially if I have a large drawing that I spent lots of time on. It looks at this point like it's gone. However, if we go back to model space, it's still there. I'm going to go back to layout space. We simply covered up the hole that allows us to see it, or the portal, the viewport. So at this point, how do we recreate a new viewport if undo is not an option? Well, focus your attention to the ribbon tab all the way down at the end. You'll see what's called layout. You will not always see that. For example, if I go back to model space, you don't see it anymore. So you need to be in a layout to see it. Now that we see it, I'm going to select that, and then the entire ribbon changes to all things relating to layouts. What I'm going to do to create a new one from scratch over here in this panel, I'm going to select the little button that has a square with a star in it. That is my new viewport command. So I'm going to click that, and just like I'm creating a rectangle, I'm going to click and then click the opposite corner, and there's my new layout. Okay, so creating one is as easy as that. Let's create another one. Of course, I could copy that one. Alright, and you might think, you're unable to create it off the sheet, but you can. It just wouldn't print. Now, there are additional ways of creating viewports that can be very handy. For example, I'm going to create a viewport with a different shape than a rectangle. So I'm going to go to the Home tab, Circle, and I'm going to create a circle out in space. And I'll take this one step farther. We haven't talked much about this command, but it's called a polyline, and it's the same as a line except all the lengths are connected as one continuous line. So I'm going to click polyline, and I'm going to create some kind of a crazy overlapping shape. The only requirement is you have to type in C for close. You cannot snap to the endpoint. You have to finish this by saying C, enter. That way it's all seen as one continuous object. Now, I am able to convert those two objects to a viewport. So I'm going to go back to this layout tab up here, and back over to my button where it says rectangular, but this time I have to actually select on the word rectangular. And these are two additional ways of creating viewports, but I want the one that says object. So I'm going to select object, and all I have to do is select on the edge of my shape, and instantly it cuts a hole, and I have a square around there, so I have to double click and zoom out. Okay, and let's repeat that sequence, object, and I'm going to select this other crazy shape, and sure enough it's able to cut that into a viewport. Of course, it's not a viewport I would want, but my point here is it will handle nearly any shape you throw at it, providing you do a close. Okay, I'm going to double click outside the viewport, and I'm going to delete these two. Alright, let's do one more thing here, and we'll jump into another drawing. So, the next thing I want to do is I want to control the scaling in here. So we already know how to do that, but I'm going to double click inside here, and I'm going to look at my scale down in the status bar, and I see 1.1. Well, that tells me, and I've got room left over, that I can probably scale this thing 1 to 1, and I have room left over. So I'm going to click on my list of scales all the way at the top, selecting 1, and now I can move this and center it and what have you. Now I'm going to activate the other viewport by double clicking in there, and I'm able to scale this one differently. So I'm going to click on this, and let's say I need to show this one at half scale. So I'm going to select 1 to 2. Okay? And now I'm going to double click outside that one. So you're seeing a little preview of things to come. We are able to scale each viewport independently. Okay, and I'm going to just decrease the viewport a bit. Now the grid becomes distracting, so when I double click to activate the viewport, I'm going to shut the grid off. That's down here right next to the word model. So I'm going to shut that off, and I'm going to repeat that in this one. I'm going to double click to activate and then shut its grid off. You should start getting used to that because, again, it's like throwing a net over your drawing and it's just distracting. Okay, so we get a little feel. You're able to scale independently each viewport. And the last thing is to show you would be when I double click to reactivate, if I roll my wheel mouse for any reason, I have now changed or disrupted my scale, and then I have to go back and rescale it to 1 to 1. And you can see what happens now. I have to pan it, and I have to be careful when I pan I don't roll the wheel mouse again. So the next and last feature before we jump into a project drawing would be I can lock the scale of my viewport so that that does not happen. So to lock the scale of the viewport, I want you to focus your attention back to the status bar down here. And notice next to the scale, 2 buttons to the left is a tiny padlock. And it's always in the open position. So I'm going to lock that by clicking it. And now watch what happens. Even though this is active, right, I can select my geometry. If I roll my wheel mouse, it zooms to the sheet, not to the geometry in the viewport. So I can no longer disrupt my scale. If I need to make any adjustments, I need to pan this over, I have to unlock it, do what I need to do, and then try to remember to relock it. Okay, let's try that one more time in the other viewport. So I'm going to double click to activate it, and I'm going to select the little padlock to lock it, and then double click outside of it. Now no matter what, whether I'm active in it or not active in it, it will only zoom to the sheet. So that's helpful. Finally, if I activate this viewport, even though I shut off the grid, I still have the distraction of this, and sometimes you'll see it, sometimes you won't, the navigation bar, and that can also be disruptive. I would recommend keeping this on and keeping this here, but to shut this off and the navigation bar when it does show, you have these 3 settings in here. I'm going to click the little plus sign, and I'm going to turn off. Oh, it won't let me click because I've locked it. So here's another thing that the lock does. So I have to escape out of that and turn the padlock off. Oh, now we see the navigation bar. It makes sense, right? You can't navigate if it's locked. So now I'm going to click the plus sign, turn off the view cube, turn off the navigation bar, and then go back and lock it and double click outside of it. That's not mandatory to do that, but sometimes those things get in the way. You're trying to click something and it's just preventing you. Alright, so review. Creating a new viewport with this layout tab, and if you open up the list, you can create a rectangular one. You can create a polygonal one. I didn't go over that, but this one would just let you draw it on the fly as long as you do the close. Alright, C for close, and it creates it. Okay, so polygonal one, that's assuming it's non-rectangular. And then there's the third one where we can convert any object, and if you read that little list there, any closed polyline, ellipse, spline, region, circle can be converted into a viewport. Okay, so we've got some of the groundwork. The next thing we're going to do is jump into a little project, and we're going to introduce, this layout process and viewports, and then on top of that, introducing our second topic called annotation scaling, and that is a great improvement to control the scale of text heights and dimensions and multi-leader and even hatching. Alright, so there's a drawing that you have in your downloaded courseware, and it's called Annotation Layout and Annotation Scale Exercise. Open up that file and it looks like this. And notice down in the lower left corner you've got a Layout tab, C-size paper. Give a click on that, and this is a C-size paper, which means 24 inches wide, 18 inches up and down. There are no viewports, so we're going to have to create from scratch. Now, you don't have this in your courseware, but I want to show you what we're about to do, the finished product of this. This is what's going to happen throughout this class lesson. And I want you to notice that there are 3 viewports, independent viewports. There are 3 different scales. So we have a 1/4 inch to the foot, we have 3/4 inch to a foot, and we have 3/8 inch to the foot. I want you to pay particular notice that even though they're all 3 different scales, we have the same text heights in each one. And there's really only 2 text heights. If it's small, it's an 1/8 inch. If it's large, it's a 1/4 inch. So in these labels, that's a 1/4 inch, that's an 1/8 inch. And then the same here, yet, different scale, yet the same size. Now I'm going to take you into model space, and that's not going to be the case. Okay, so these are the objects that we're seeing, and clearly you can see that there's a different text height for each one of these. Alright, yet the magic of annotative scaling, when you go back into layout, they all appear the same height. Now, what's happening here is if you were to do this manually, and we know from our Dimension Part 2 lesson, we would have to consult that chart. I refer to it as the cheat sheet. Or I would just simply do the math to figure out at that scale with a 1/4 inch text height. I believe this scale we talked about a lot. In order for this to print at a 1/4 inch, it has to be 12 inches tall in model space. In order for this to print at an 1/8 inch tall, it has to be 6 inches, right? And that's at a 1/4 inch to the foot. Those values would be different in each one of these 3 different scales. Now that's a lot to keep track of. I'd have to have my chart or my math to recalculate that for each one of these details. I would have to have a different dimension style for each scale so that when I go into my layout space, it all looks the same. Now, the beauty of annotative scaling is it's going to do all of that for us, and it's a great system, but you need to pay attention to the process. Okay, so we're going to set that up, and we're going to do the process 3 times. It's the same process. We're going to do it for this viewport, and this viewport. And my hopes is that you'll begin to feel comfortable with the process, and then you're going to have a homework assignment to do that one more time with a different drawing and different requirements of viewports and scales. Okay, so let's get started. Alright, now first thing we're going to need to do is take a look and review our layers. Alright, I have some layers in here. What I don't have is a layer for viewports, so I'm going to need that. So let's create our layer viewport. Alright, I'm going to go with my usual layer name, VPORT. And I'm going to give it that mustardy orange color over here, 30. And then why are we creating this? So that it doesn't plot. Alright, since we're going to begin with this, I'm going to double click to make that the current layer, and then I'm going to close this out. Now, in this process, the rewards are a lot less thinking involved, a lot less calculating. But the dangers are you still have to be aware of a couple of things. You still have a responsibility. It's just way less than having to calculate all those text heights. So pay attention to the process, and let's begin. Step 1, we're going to create a viewport. Now, if you take a look at this viewport, it's a little more than halfway across the drawing, and it's from this corner with a little bit of room left over from the title block. Okay, so we are going to create a viewport of that approximate size. You don't have to stress out because you can always grip edit it if it's too big or small. Alright, so I'm clicking layout. I'm going to go to rectangular. Alright, so I'm picking this button, whatever it happens to be on. I'm opening up my list here and I'm selecting rectangular. And by eye, I'm going to come in just off the corner. Remember, you don't go too close or the endpoint snap will grab hold. So I'm clicking right here and I'm going to bring that out to about here. And the viewport does what it's supposed to do. It does a zoom extents to whatever's out there in model space. So, step one, I'm going to open up my viewport, double click on it. Don't need to see the grid, it's distracting. So I'm going to shut off my grid right next to the model button here. And I'm going to pan my floor plan to the approximate center of my viewport. And then I'm going to set my display scale, which if you look at your handout, right, and you should all have a handout which would be this handout, okay. You have to keep an eye on what scale it is. This is 1/4 inch to the foot. So I'm going to set my display scale, as we've done, to 1/4 inch to the foot. To scroll down a bit, it'll zoom in, and then if you remember the finished product, we need some room on the side and underneath for dimensions. So I'm going to pan this thing up towards the corner, and if I happen to run out of space, I will stretch out my viewport. Now I'm going to turn off my view cube here, so I'm going to click the plus sign and turn off the view cube. I'm not going to lock my viewport just yet because I have to add dimensions and make sure that everything's going to fit, and once I'm convinced it's going to fit, then I'm going to lock it. Now I'm going to jump back into model space and I'm going to zoom into my floor plan. Now you should have your handout next to you because you're going to have to add the dimensions, right? You're going to have to add these dimensions and type in that text. So have that handout handy right next to you. And before we go any further, we now need to interact with the annotative scaling process. Okay? Annotative scaling takes place, or will need it to take place, in our dimension style, our text style, and our multi-leader style. So in order for us to add dimensions, we have to make sure that our dimension style and text style is now annotative. Here's how we do that. We have to get to the text and dimension style manager, and we do that through this annotation label. We pop that open, and I'm going to select, starting with my text style manager button right here, and I've got 3 styles. I'm not going to work with standard. I'm only going to work with text dimension and text miscellaneous. So I happen to be in text miscellaneous right now, so all I need to do is select the little annotative checkbox, and it creates this little symbol next to it. You've seen this symbol in other drawings. I just never pointed it out why that's there and what to do with it. A reminder, do not add a text height here. Always leave that 0, otherwise we are locked into that text height, and we're going to need to be flexible in the drawing, 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch. So leave that big. So that's all we need to do here. So I'm going to make my text dimension also annotative. So I have to click that. Now it senses that I made a change, so I'm going to say yes, I want to save that change. And now it shows now I click text dimension and I select annotative as well, and it shows that symbol next to it. Okay, so I've just made both my text styles annotative, and I want to remain in text miscellaneous. So I'm going to say apply close, and now I need to go back up to the annotation label and go into my dimension style. Okay, this is crucial for the process. So notice I only need one dimension style, and it doesn't have to be -48 or 96 because this one style will be flexible for any scale. That's the beauty of this. So I'm going to go to Modify, and where I make this annotative is in the Fit tab. So I'm going to select Fit, and I have this section here. Now, in the class where we talked about dimension styles, I mentioned that it was extremely important to make this number the scale of whatever your viewport is going to be. Now we ignore this and we make sure that we select this checkbox. Okay, so that's all we need to do to make it annotative, is select that checkbox. There is one more thing that I want you to look at just to confirm. Remember, dimension styles reference a text style. So if the text style that your dimension style is using is not annotative, the system breaks down. So let's just go in and click Text, and we're good to go because we made both of these styles annotative. If it happened to be on standard, we would have a problem. Okay, so just make sure it's on text dimension and everything else is good. So pick OK and then close. Alright, we are now ready to add our dimensions, with one exception. Look what layer you're in, so we have to be sharp with our layers. I'm going to go to my dimension layer, and look at your handout. We have to add some dimensions down below here and off to the side. So I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to add with linear. I'm going to add my first 12-foot dimension here. And at this point, do not do anything further because we've already made a mistake, and I wanted to point out this mistake because this is probably the biggest thing that will ruin the process. Alright, so I want to make a big deal of this so that it hopefully will not happen. Now, first time through, you wouldn't know this, but this text height is way too big. And there's one key step that we have to do before we add any annotative objects, meaning text dimensions. We have to make sure that our annotative scale matches the viewport scale, and this does not. So this is the number one thing that will ruin this process. When you realize that, it's just a simple thing that you have to do before you move on. So instead of worrying about all the calculations of text heights and scales and so forth, as long as your text and dimension styles annotative, the number one responsibility you have is to set this scale to the scale of the viewport before you add dimensions or text. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this because this is bad. Alright, now one last time, make sure that your model space scale matches your paper space viewport scale. That is crucial. Okay, so set it to 1/4 inch to a foot, and now watch when I add that dimension, my number is going to be half the size. Okay, that is the correct size. When all is said and done, that will print at an 1/8 inch text height. So now I'm going to continue on, and I'm going to add the rest of the dimensions as per the handout. Remember, snap at the corners of the house, and I'm going to zoom in so that my dimension line is even. And one last dimension down below. And now I'm going to come over here and dimension the heights. Alright, so I've created my dimensions. I'm just going to zoom into that a little bit in model space. I've created my dimensions as per the handout. Now I'm going to jump into layout space and see how it looks. Now, yellow on white, not so good. So I'm going to change the color of my dimension layer. Let's say I'll make it red. Red is pretty visible in both spaces. Alright, so there's my dimensions. I've got room left over on the right and below so that I can add my text labels. So I'm going to go back into model space, and you should have finished your dimensions, and now we're going to add the word warehouse floor in the middle of the floor plan. Now, there is a layer for text, so I'm going to go into the text, set the text layer current, and I'm going to go to single line text. Okay, make sure it's single line text, and I'm going to pick approximately where the word appears, and I want you to immediately look at your command prompt. It's saying something we have not yet seen. It says specify paper height. Okay, so I'm going to translate that, and this is the great part of annotation scaling. What it's saying is, what is the text height you want it to measure when it's plotted on the piece of paper? And for us, it greatly reduces what we have to remember. All we have to remember is if it's big text, it's a quarter. If it's small text, it's an eighth. So if you looked at your handout, the word warehouse floor is the big size text. So all I need to do is type in 1/4 at the command prompt. And of course it's asking me for rotation, so I enter that. Make sure you're in caps lock. And type in warehouse floor. Enter, enter. Now, just as a side note, what if I wanted that word underlined? Anyone remember how to do that? Okay, after the fact, like it is now, I would have to double click on it, and I'd have to pick just in front of the W and type in %%U. Okay, then I'm going to go below, and I'm going to add those two words that you see on your handout, the word floor plan and then scale 1/4 inch equals a foot. So I go back to single line text, pick to begin, look at my command prompt. This is a large size text, so it's a 1/4 inch, and I hit enter. And it says specify rotation, enter again, and then this time I want it underlined, so %%U, and then floor plan, enter, enter. Go back to single line text, pick underneath it. Now this time it's smaller text height, it's an 1/8 inch text height, so I have to type that in, 1/8, enter, enter. Now I'm going to type in the word scale, colon, 1/4 inch equals 1 foot dash 0 inches. Enter, enter. And I'm just going to zoom in and snug that up to make it look good. And then zoom out and just observe, yeah, that's approximately centered. And then I'm going to go and activate my layout space, and that looks fine to me. Now, going back to layout one more time, what made that happen? 3 things. 1, text height annotative. 2, dimension style annotative. 3, I set my viewport scale in model space before I added the text. Now, we've just finished the first cycle of doing this. So what we're going to do is start the cycle over. So step 1, I go back to layout space. Step 2, it looks like I'm in the model space, so I double click to go to paper space. I switch my layer to viewport. I go to layout, rectangular, and I'm going to make my second viewport. Now again, the size of this is not critical, but just to make it a little nice, I'm going to track off this corner over a little bit, click, and if you look at your handout, it goes about halfway down. Okay, so I've created my viewport. Now I'm going to double click inside, and this is going to be the stair detail. So I'm going to pan the stair detail to the middle of the viewport and zoom in on it to fill it up. And now I have to add a new scale, or I have to set a new scale. So if you look at your handout, it says 3/8 to a foot. So I'm going to go down to my scale list, find and select 3/8 to a foot. It zooms out a bit. I look at my handout and I don't need dimensions going off of it, so I'm fine. So at this point I'm going to lock it. So I'm going to lock this one, and I don't believe I locked the other one. So I'm going to double click in there, and I see it's not locked, and lock that one. Okay, so now I'm going to go back into model space, and I have to go find the stair detail, and I need to add its dimensions. So I'm in the wrong layer, so I have to go to layer dimension. And before I add anything in this detail, what do I have to do? I have to reset my model space scale to match my layout space viewport scale. So I look at the handout and it's 3/8 inch to a foot. So I find that. And now I'm ready to add dimensions. So I've got 3 dimensions to add: the 8-foot, the 10.5 inches, and the 4-foot 6.5. So I'm going to start with the 8-foot. So I'm going to select linear, and I'm going to snap to the midpoint right here. And watch how I do this. So I snap to the midpoint there. I'm going to go straight down and select here, and then straight back up and snap to the midpoint again. Reason I do that, it doesn't give me any extension lines, because I don't want an extension line overriding my object line, my white line. Next is the 10.5 inches. So I'm clicking linear, and let's just see, here to here and straight up, and then the 4-foot 6.5. So now watch what happens here. When I snap to, let's say, the top of the first step, I will come straight across and click there, and then just lift that up a little bit and click. Now you can see that I have extension line override, and that's going to look a little strange when I print the drawing. You're going to see the wall is going to turn red, or whatever color I might reassign it to. Or if my white lines are thick, it's going to get thin here because my dimensions are thin. So how do I get rid of that? I click on my dimension, I select that grip, and I just bring it up to this grip, and then hit escape. Okay, and that gets rid of the extension line overrun. Now, when I add my note, which on the handout says 7 risers, what is a riser? Stairs are made up of 2 things: treads. Tread is what you step on, and then the riser is the vertical piece connecting one tread to another tread. And the number of risers are important architecturally. So that's a multi-leader command. So I'm going to select leader. I'm going to snap to, let's say, the midpoint of the second step. I'm going to bring my cursor up and click, and I'm going to type in my note, 7 risers. And I have 2 choices to finish this: either pick close text editor or just pick out in space. I'm going to pick out in space, but you're going to see a problem's going to happen. Okay, say goodbye to my note, and I'm going to zoom in, and you'll see that the note's there. It's really tiny, and there's a microscopic little arrowhead. What is the problem that's causing this? The problem is we never made our multi-leader style annotative. Okay, so that's the behavior that you get when you use a style that is not scaled or annotative scaled properly. For example, if we go and change my dimension style to standard, we're going to get the same behavior with a linear dimension. I'll dimension, let's say, from the midpoint of here to here and back to here. Okay, so I'm getting a decimal number, I'm getting arrowheads, and everything's microscopically tiny. So I'm going to switch this back to my dimension style, and What we have to do to make this right is to create a multi-leader style that is annotative. So I'm going to delete this since this is no good. And follow along with me on this. So we go to Annotation, and the third one down is Multileader. So I know that the current style is no good and there is no backup style, so I have to pick the Style Manager button, and we're going to have to create one from scratch. So step 1, New, and I'm just going to call the style name Multileader. Okay, Multileader. Now I could click Annotative right here, but we're going to have to do a few things to make this right. So I'm just going to go to Continue. And you have 3 tabs here. The leader format's okay, right? Nothing we have to do here. But the leader structure, we're going to fix this where it says landing settings, set landing distance, which is this straight line. Right? Everywhere else that's called a tab, T-A-B, but AutoCAD calls it landing distance. It's got some crazy amount, 23/64. We're going to click in there, highlight it, and it should be 1/8 of an inch. So you can see that I've got now to the proper amount. Now that we're here, here's where we're going to click Annotative. Then we have to go to Content. Why? Because leaders access a text style. And here's the other problem. It's using standard. So we're going to switch this to the text dimension, so it's using the same text style as my dimensions, and then its text height is not even the same as our dimensions. That has to be 1/8. So I'm going to highlight that and type in 1/8. Okay, so we did how many things? 4 things. Text height 1/8, text style using a style that's the same as my dimensions, which is annotative. Then back in leader structure, landing distance 1/8, and then of course none of that's any good if you don't click Annotate. Alright, so I'm going to pick OK. I'm going to select Close, and let's create the multi-leader again, and it should be correct. So here's the leader command here. So I'm picking that, snapping to the midpoint of the second step, bringing my mouse, and already you can tell because the arrow shows up, clicking out here, and typing in 7 risers. And then just click out in space away from it, and now my text height's correct, and everything is appropriately scaled. Okay, last thing we're going to do with the stair detail is put the label underneath it, which is standard single line text. So I go back to single line text, pick a point below, keep an eye on your paper height amount. It's showing 1/8 inch. I want to put the title, which would be 1/4. So 1/4, enter. Rotation, enter. And %U. Stair detail. Enter, enter. Go back to single line text, pick underneath it. Make it 1/8 paper height. And scale 3/8 equals a foot. 3/8 inch equals 1 foot dash 0 inches. And I'm just going to snug that up by grip editing it. Oh, I forgot to write the word scale. So I'm going to double click, click left of it, and then scale. There we go. Now I want to see how that looks in layout space. I'm going to go back and pick my C-size layout. Everything's looking good. So you can see again, text heights are correct. Oh, I forgot to switch to my text layer. I'll fix that. But you can see, it's hard to see zoomed in that much. Let me just go out a little bit more. You can see the text heights are 1/8 inch, 1/8 inch, and 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch. Alright, let's go back into model, and I'm going to select my text underneath it and put that in layer text. Shame on me. Okay, one last time we go back into the C-size layout tab, and I'm going to start the cycle over one last time for the footing details. So what do we do first? Layer viewport. Then we go to the layout tab. Then we go to the rectangular button, and just to make this look nice, I'm going to track off of here and here, and then bring that up and just track off of this with a little space. So there's my third viewport. I double click inside it to activate it. Go find the footing detail, zoom to fill as best as possible, and then scale it. And if you look at your handout, this is 3/4 inch to a foot scale. So I'm going to find that in my list. There it is. Lock it. Then to model space I go. Zoom into it. Change my layer to dimension. And before I go any further, I have to once again change the scale here in model space to match the scale in the viewport. So again, 3/4 inch. Now I'm going to add those dimensions off to the left and below it. Snap to that line, to this line, and get them both at the same spot. And one last 6-inch dimension. Okay, so there's my my 4 dimensions. Now I'm going to add my notes. So that's another multi-leader. And I'm going to snap to the midpoint here. And if it's a little tough to see on your handout, that's 3/4 inch and then ply for plywood. So 3/4 inch ply. And then my last note underneath it. So it's an architectural note. 2 by 8 F period J period, which stands for floor joist, and then at 16-inch O period C period, which stands for on center. So 2 by 8 floor joists at 16-inch on center. Alright, and then one last thing, we add our text. So this time I'm going to remember to set my text layer current. And I'm going to add the label footing detail at 1/4 inch to the foot. I'm sorry, at 1/4 inch text height. So %U footing detail. Alright, and then underneath it at 1/8 inch text height. Scale 3/4 inch equals 1 foot dash 0 inches. And I'm going to look at it in layout space. Fine. So there's my finished product. Notice all the label sizes. Text heights are the same. Dimension text heights the same. But if you were to look at them in model space, you'll see that they are not the same. Okay. You can see that the text heights here are different. It's definitely noticeable there. And all is fine in layout space. Alright, so hopefully you feel a little more comfortable. It's the things that are vital. Set your styles, annotative. Be careful of your layer, what layer is current, and then make sure that your viewport scale and your model space scale is the same down in the status bar before you add any annotative text. Alright. So, I'm going to take this one step further. Many times construction projects, whether it be civil, architectural, structural, are more than one page. You could have many pages in one drawing file. And think of pages as layout tabs. So we're going to create a second page from this. And to create a second page, what we're going to do is right-click on this current layout tab. And we're going to select Move or Copy. So I'm clicking that. And down in the lower left corner of this, I'm going to select Create a Copy. And not so important on this one, but when you have multiple layouts, I'm going to click Move to the End, or Move to End, and then pick OK. And look at what it did. Created a copy of it. You could see with the number 2 in parentheses there. So if I click on that, it doesn't look like it did anything because it's exactly the same. So we're going to make some changes. In our second layout tab, the one with the 2, first let's rename it so we can distinguish it. So I'm going to double click on that, and I'm going to call this Sheet 2 Electrical Plan. Sheet 2 Electrical Plan. And then I'm going to double click on the first one, and I'm going to call this Sheet 1 Floor Plan. Now, just because I changed their name doesn't mean it's going to be any different. Now I need to make a difference. So in your Sheet 2 layout, click that, and we're going to delete these 2 viewports. And again, don't worry, they're still there in Sheet 1, so go ahead and take a peek just to make sure. And then I'm going to move this layout to be in the center. Now, as we called this electrical plan, that's because we're going to add electrical symbols in here that we don't want to see in the other viewport. And I don't want to see my dimensions in this viewport, but I do want to see them in the Sheet 1 viewport. So that introduces another capability called Viewport Layer Visibility. It's a great feature. Now, what we're able to do is control the layer visibility per viewport. For example, I don't want to see the dimensions in here. So I'm going to double click to activate, and then I'm going to go up and look at my layer list, and we already know that this is on off. We know that this is freeze thaw, but it's the third symbol in that's new to us. Freeze or thaw in the current viewport. Click that third symbol in for dimensions, and then click into the drawing to dismiss. So my dimensions disappeared here, but if I go back to my Sheet 1 tab, they're still there. So now I'm able to reuse this floor plan in another layout and add different information on it. And that's what we're going to do. Now, if you go to Model Space, you'll see all layers. All right? There's no viewport layer visibility here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer called Electric. Alright, so I'm picking Layer Properties, New Layer, and let's just call it Electric. And I'll make this color, let's say, also green. And I'm going to make this current. Now I'm just going to draw some simple electrical symbols in here. One of the most common one is an outlet. Alright, so I'm picking circle, and I'm not worrying about the proper size. I just want to give you the idea of this. And I'm going to draw a little straight line going into the circle, and I'm going to mirror that from the center of this. Okay, so that symbol, that is a common symbol for an electrical outlet. And I'm going to copy that along the wall here, just for the effect of this. Let's say I've got all these outlets along the wall. Now, when I go to Sheet 1, I see the outlets and I don't want to see them. This would just be for a floor plan. But in Sheet 2, I want to see them. So what I'm now going to do is go back to this layout, double click to activate that, and I'm going to freeze this in the current viewport. Okay, So look, there's no outlets in this one. There are outlets in this one. So think about the capabilities now. I can even do that. Now they're in different layouts, but just to show you, I could copy this and I could say I don't want to see it in this one, but I want to see it in this one. And you may not realize this, but in a construction project, you would have multiple floor plans. Let's say even if there's just one story building, you'll have a floor plan that shows all the dimensions of the wall layouts and window and door locations. You'll have the same floor plan, but without all of that, but it'll show the electrical. A third floor plan that'll show the plumbing. A fourth floor plan that might show the reflected ceiling plan, and it could be an on and on and on. So the beauty is you don't have to keep copying in model space the whole floor plan. You can put all of that information on one floor plan and just control its visibility per viewport. One viewport you'll only see the plumbing, one you'll see the floor plan with all the walls, doors, and windows, the other one the electrical. And the beauty of that is if there's a design change, for example, let's say we need to shorten up this wall. So if I go to stretch and I stretch this, all instances of that floor plan have that change at the same time. I don't have to go to each copy and do that 5 times. Okay, that's a big jump in efficiency that hopefully you understood there. Okay, so that's viewport layer visibility. Again, it's the third symbol in. If you rest your mouse on it, freeze or thaw in the current viewport. All right, so that concludes the third topic, the annotation scales. All right, we went through the cycle 3 times. I've repeated a few times, the important things to do, which is make sure that your scales are the same of the viewport in layout, and then whatever scale you chose for that, make sure in model space that scale is the same. Now, one final thing, I want to show you what happens when things go wrong. Right? Everything, if you're following me, worked out right, but here's what happens when things go wrong. All right, zoom into the floor plan in model space and change your scale to 1/8 inch to a foot. Now, because of the mistake I made earlier by having that at 1/8 inch, my number size has changed. So I'm going to make a change on the fly here. Let's change it to something we haven't used here. Let's say a 1/2 inch to a foot. Okay, so I've just changed my display scale to a 1/2 inch to a foot. Now, I'm going to create a dimension inside the floor plan. Let's say from here to here. Just go to linear. Oh, we have to make sure our layer is correct. I'm sorry. Switch to your dimension layer. Go to linear and create a dimension from here to here. Grip edit that back up in here so I don't have any extension line overrun. Now, you can immediately see that there's a problem, right? I have different text heights. So that alone should say, wait a minute, what's wrong here? And hopefully get you to realize that that's wrong. But here's the other startling thing. Go back to your Sheet 1 Layout tab and you won't even see it. Okay? The fact is that the way this is set up is your viewport will not display geometry from any other scale. And that's a good thing. You normally want that. I don't expect you to fully realize why just yet. But that's typically a good thing. That's going to come in handy for your homework assignment, whether you even realize it or not. There might be a dimension that is in the way in model space, but you don't see it in the viewport because it's a dimension from another scale. Alright, so I want to show you what happens. Let's say we need that dimension there. So I'm going to go back into model space. So what I have to do is tell this dimension to redisplay itself at 1/4 inch to the foot, not a 1/2 inch to a foot. So I fix this by doing the following. I select it, and then I right click, and then I go to Annotative Object. Okay, you would never see this there if you weren't clicking and right clicking on something annotative. And then I would go to Add Delete Scale. And it'll show you what scale it was created at. Well, I'm going to add the correct scale. I'm going to go to Add, and I'm going to go find a 1/4 inch to the foot. Say OK. Now, normally you would delete the bad one, but I'm going to leave it there because there's really no harm in it just yet. So I'm going to leave them both in there. I'm going to pick OK. Now, nothing changes here, but now go back to your Sheet 1 layout, and now you'll see it. And it's automatically at the correct scale. Now, watch what happens. If I double-click to activate layout space and I rest my mouse on it, I see 2 of those little symbols. Now, should I change my viewport scale from a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch, all of these will disappear, but this one will reappear. I'm going to do that. So remember, I locked it, so I have to unlock it, and watch what happens when I change it to a 1/2 inch to a foot. Now it got bigger, but look, that one stays. Oh, they all changed, and sorry, I wasn't expecting that. That's because something else is set that I didn't realize, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Okay, I realize why that changed. I was playing around with this beforehand and I turned something on that isn't normally on. It's okay. Alright, I'm going to undo back to its original size there. I'm going to reset my layout space and then go back to model space. Okay, so just to revisit this, if it disappears in your layout, it's because the wrong scale was set. You don't have to erase it, but you do have to come back in and click it. Notice you're seeing the 2 scales now. Right click, Annotative Object Scale, Add Delete Scale, and now I'm going to delete the wrong scale, and you'll see one of these will go away. So I'm going to say half delete, OK, and now when I click back on it, you don't see the ghost image of the other one. So it is possible to have several scales associated with an object. It's not recommended, but it's possible. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the final topic, inquiry commands. We're already familiar with a couple of these. Certainly the first one, distance. Now, distance is formerly known as measure distance, and the reason I want to revisit this again is because if you need to simply get a dimension of something and there's no styles, or the styles you're using are all wrong, and you'll get the effect of what I showed you before if we were using standard where it shows decimal. Measure is not style dependent. So I'm going to click this, and let's say I want a measure of this whole width here. No matter what your style is, this will always look this way, with one footnote, one exception. The value of your number is based upon your system units. For example, I'm going to hit escape and type in units. Okay, if this were set to decimal and I did a distance check, it'll come out to be decimal. So you at least have to have this in the system that you want. Alright, but the beauty is you don't have to worry about scaling, text heights, and all that. It's always going to look like this in 3 places, right here, here, and down at your command prompt. So that's your fallback when your styles are not working for you and you just need to know what a number is. Okay, we can also expand this list, and we can do the same thing for radius and diameter and angle. So, example, if I pick angle and I select, let's say, 2 lines, okay, it shows me that it's a 90 degree, right? Makes sense. Shows me 90 down here, and then because it goes from the end of those lines, it gives me this huge temporary angle dimension right there. Okay, we don't have anything round or curved to do a radius diameter, so I'm going to quickly create one on the fly here. Alright, now I'm going to go into my measure list and select radius and just pick on that. And you'll get radius and diameter, so they're bunched in the same command. Okay, I'm going to delete that, and I'm also going to delete this 11-foot dimension here. Okay, the last inquiry command, last but not least, is a great command called area. And area will give you square inches, square foot, and perimeter lengths of a building or a room or any shape. And you're going to have to do this on your homework, so let's see how we would do that. Okay, the area command is in the same list, but it's further down, right? Area. So find and pick area. At your command prompt it says specify first corner point. What we're going to do is trace the inside walls of this building. And the rule is you always start and finish at the same spot. So I'm going to come down here in the lower left corner and click here. And I'm going to go up on the inside walls, click here, and you'll see this green shape. Just stay the course and snap to all the inside corners of the walls. And remember, finish in the same place you started. And then enter. And when you hit enter, you're going to see in two places at your command prompt, I see 164,304 square inches, 1141 square feet, and then perimeter 148 feet. And that's repeated at your command prompt. Okay, so if you had a complex shape and you're able to trace the perimeter, that's a nice feature to be able to get the square footage or inches or perimeter. Now, that's not all. Typically in houses and commercial buildings, you might have areas within that green shape that should not be counted as the square footage. For example, an elevator shaft, or you might have a hole in the floor to look through to the floor below. Those would not be usable square footage and should not be counted into that. So how do we deal with that? Alright, I hit escape to clear that. We're going to produce that. So go to, let's say, the rectangle command and just draw by eye a rectangle of any size similar to what I've just done. Okay, let's say that is a hole in the floor, whether it be for an elevator shaft or a void looking into the basement or the floor below, whatever. Point is, that should not be counted as square footage. So here's what we would do differently. It sounds almost like the opposite, but in order for us to subtract the area of that void, we have to begin with an add mode. Alright, so go to the measure command, open that up, select area, look down at your command prompt, and we have to begin by going with add area. Okay, before we didn't choose anything, we just started selecting the perimeter. Alright, so we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to start on the inside wall. I'm going to go all the way around just like I did first time around, corner to corner. Remember to finish where you started. And when you get back to the beginning, just like you did first time around, press enter. Now when you press enter, we now need to go to subtract mode. So I'm picking subtract. And now I'm going to trace the perimeter of the rectangle. And you'll see it's a different color. And when you get back to the beginning, press enter, and it should give you, I'm going to press second enter, it should give you the total here. So let's find the first one, and I can see I did something, I messed up. I'm going to do this again real quick here. So I'm going to go to area, I'm going to go to add area, and I'm going to trace the perimeter. I think I accidentally hit escape when I shouldn't have first time around. So I'm adding area, I'm back to where I started, I press enter, and then I go to subtract area, and see, my first time around my area wasn't green. So now I trace over the green with my subtract mode. Do the same thing, start and finish in the same area, press enter to complete. Okay, and now I'm going to hit a second enter to totally exit out or escape. And to see what happened, hit the F2 function key. Otherwise it's hard to track. Alright, so you can see up here, this was my original square footage, right, 1141. I then subtracted, or I traced over the rectangle, which was 58, and then it gave me my new total, 1082. Okay, so if you took this and subtracted this, you get your new total. Okay, that can be handy. And if you had more than one void, you would just continue and stay in subtract mode. You would see at the command prompt it would keep you in subtract mode until you either pressed a second enter or hit escape. Okay, so give that a try. Your totals will be different because remember we drew a random size rectangle. Alright, so that concludes the lesson. What you need to do now is take a look at the assignment. I'm going to actually open up the assignment file. And if you have the assignment handout, which I think I do, somewhere I do. Well, I'm going to be reading it as we look at this this picture here. So this is the homework assignment file, and it says layout assignment spring 2018. So you can see it's a house, and you can see that it's got what's the total square footage. So you're going to trace the inside walls, ignore the I should say the inside of the outside walls, right, which is this shape here. So ignore any inside walls, just stay along this perimeter, and you're going to snap to all those inside corners there, and get a little challenge over here and in some areas where another wall intersects it. So you're going to find that perimeter. There is nothing to subtract. Okay, so what you need to do, if you look at your assignment handout, you see the finished product there at the bottom of the page, the picture of it. So you're going to need to create 3 viewports. Now, very important, the viewports on the right, bathroom and bay window, you have to create a second layer, viewports 1, and do not make that no plot, because there are plenty of times where you want to see the viewport border. That would look very strange without that circle around the bay window viewport. And you want to just isolate the bathroom and have that with a rectangular viewport border shown. Alright, so let's read the instructions. The way you're going to begin this is different. Okay, so you're going to open up this drawing, which I've just done. You're going to immediately resave it as layout annotation assignment XX, and of course you know XX is your first and last name with the day of your class after it. And I just said see step 11 below. Number 3, you are going to right click, and let me just say ahead of time what you're going to do here. Instead of copy pasting this into our title block, we're going to bring our title block into this. Alright, and that's what's different about step 3. So how we do that, pay attention. I'm going to right click on layout 1. Actually I have to left click on it first to activate it. Then I'm going to right click on it, layout 1, and second from the top I'm going to say from template. Now, problem is our title block drawings are not DWTs, they're DWGs. So we're going to switch that down here. So select drawing star period DWG, and then go find your title block drawing. And when you find and pick your title block drawing, select open, and it's going to show your layout tab names in here. And hopefully you don't have layout 1, layout 2. I warned you a number of times that's bad practice. Your title block layout should have some sort of an obvious name here, and for me it's title block 18 by 12. Then I pick OK, and it went into that drawing and grabbed everything in layout and duplicated that. So now when I click on this, here is my border and title block. My drawing is way out in space somewhere here. If I double click and do a zoom extents, there it all is. But guess what? I don't want this layout. I have to delete this. Okay? Remember how we started our other drawing. Okay? We start with layer viewport. Look what I did for you. I gave you 2 layers. You already have viewports and viewport. So you have to make one no plot and one plot. So if you look at your handout, the main viewport is the floor plan. That one we don't want to plot. So if you're not sure which is which, let's just take a quick look here. So we've got viewport and viewports. They're both set to no plot. I'm going to unclick the no plot for viewport, and we're going to create the first one in layer viewports. Okay, so I'm going to go to viewports, which I know is no plot, and I'm going to go to layout, rectangular, create this. Right, this is a 1/8 inch to a foot, so I'm going to double click, set it to an 1/8 inch. Where are you? There it is. And I know I have to put dimensions almost all around it, so I may have to stretch this out a little bit. But and I need to see the total house square footage, so certainly that has to come down. And as you can see on your handout, I've got plenty of room to stretch that further. Alright, now I'm going to jump into model space, and I'm ready to go here. So what do we do next? We make sure that our styles are annotative. I'm going to have to do something creative with my hatch, because if you look at the handout, I don't see any plumbing equipment when I'm looking at the overall drawing. So I'll give you a hint here. You have to freeze the layer of the plumbing. If you simply shut it off, you'll still see the hatch will show you the footprint of it. I'm going to have to create another layer for hatch that'll blanket the whole room with my plumbing layer frozen. Then in my bathroom, I want to see it like it looks right now. Alright, I'm giving away too much here. You got to think about this a little bit. Okay, so go down the list. You're going to switch to the Layout tab containing your title block and prepare new viewports. You're going to create the viewports with appropriate size, then scale the geometry within it. Include the connecting lines, right? So I want to see this as a circle, and I'm going to have to create a layer for phantom. I don't believe there is one in here. There's nothing phantom. So you have to create a layer for phantom. You'll have to draw your circle in layout around here. And then you'll have to draw the connecting line to it. Let's say snap to nearest. And then connect that down to your actual larger viewport circle. All the text should be in model space. And pay attention to steps 7, 8, 9. And step 10, you're going to create a CTB, and you're going to make red black with the line weight of 0256. Yellow is going to be color 9, and green is going to be changed to blue. All of that, worry about at the time you're going to print this. I would love this to be printed in its full 18 by 12 on the large plotter. Okay, when so, save this, email this as the layout assignment XX with your name and the day, and email to me and submit me the hard copy. Okay, I hope you're able to conclude this assignment based upon the lesson prior to this. Good luck and goodbye.